We have an election of the German parliament, the Bundestag, in February. And as you referenced, the AfD, the so-called Alternative for Germany, will be expected to be maybe in second place, 18 to 20% roughly of the votes. And they are right extremist party. They turn right at every election, far more right, up to the place that you could say they're using openly a Nazi language now, a reference to the Nazi regime, unheard of in German politics before, which for obvious reasons had problems with the time between 1933 and 1944, and it was not acceptable in the German political system to reference anything during that time period as positive in any political wing. So now it's common for the AfD to reference it, and what we realize in the German public is that there's no outcry anymore when that happens. You grow insensitive to these references. And that's also due to the media reporting. It's a sensation the first couple of times it happens, and after that you say, okay, that's what they do. And that's what they do seems to be the reaction to the reporting about right-wing nationalist movements, is once the sensation wears off, you have to talk about the contents. And Heather, I really liked, now I remember what I liked about, what I wanted to tell you when we had a coffee is, right-wing movements or parties in countries around the world share one thing, and you put it very interestingly. You said it's a global phenomenon, but people experience it locally. So they do not abstract and say, oh, that's a global trend that we're experiencing. My personal situation is due to the elites in my country not working right. And thusly, nationalism is the answer to the problem. And when we're in this room discussing solutions to the problem, we tend to focus on the national level as well and say, well, the solution has to be on the local level, but we disregard the global aspects of the thing. And one major aspect is, and then we see that in German journalism as well when we report about right-wing extremist and national movements, is the use of platforms such as Facebook, X, Twitter, or just let's call them Silicon Valley platform industry that controls a huge percentage of what content actually reaches the audience. And there's no regulation whatsoever. We have tried in Europe, at least. We have the Digital Service Act, we have the European Media Freedom Act, but the regulation is not strong enough to regulate those platforms. And what do we see? The platforms are the ones that make right-wing extremists great all around the globe. Think of Donald Trump. What would he be without Elon Musk and X and about True Social? Think of the Chinese government and TikTok. Think of actually TikTok being the preferred medium of the AfD amongst youth. They score really high values in the younger population in Germany, because that's how they reach their audience, and traditional media doesn't. So we have to think about how do we reach our audience as traditional media. It's not just about reporting the facts, it's getting the reporting to the audience. But how do we do that if we don't have an infrastructure? And we need to talk as Europeans about a European infrastructure to get our news to the people. I see lots of cameras, I see lots of microphones. That used to be the way how we reported. But that audience, we don't reach anymore. We do not have the infrastructure to do that, and we need to talk about that in a European sense. We need European infrastructure. We need European independence from infrastructure abroad, from Silicon Valley technical companies, from Chinese TikTok. We need, let's say, a European Facebook to dream about it. That's be regulated under European regulation and so on. And then we dry out that swamp in which disinformation, misinformation, propaganda, and fake news can grow, which they use. So looking back to Germany and zooming back in on Germany and how it will affect you here in the room, the Balkan region, and the whole of Europe, I do not expect a landslide victory of the AfD. It will be around 18 to 20%. That also means that about roughly 80% of the Germans do not vote for right-wing extremists. Might seem naive viewpoint, but you have to keep that in mind to keep the real perspective, because it's a narrative that they spread. We're the second largest political force in Germany. They're not a force at all. They're preaching to their own choir. What they say is not acceptable in 80% of the political spectrum. We have to keep that in mind, but and that's the point we should worry about. It's not only the AfD. We have a new political party on the left wing that's pro-Putin, that's pro-Russia, and that shares 80 to 90% of the ideology of the AfD, just on the left-hand side of the spectrum, with the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, which is centered around a person, which seems to be a new trend in extremist and populist politics. So you take one person and make that the party, and that happens there. And her potential is around 10%, 8 to 10% in the election. Now we have 30% pro-Russian, populist to leaning to extremist votes, and they're very much media aggressive parties that rely on the platforms to reach their audience. They're against media, supporting traditional media, public broadcasting, and journalism. They will, if they have the opportunity, put into effect legislation that will hinder the free press to work efficiently. So we should be worried about strengthening, but we should not be worried that they will have a majority, a working majority, or even be part of a government in Europe in this election. But we need to keep an eye on the still stable countries in Europe, because they're the beacons that shine the light to the regions that are fragile. So the more important is that we talk about this here, Wolfgang, and connect people, journalists, civil society, because we cannot rely on the governments in Europe to do the job for us. It's our job to provide the stability in society, and journalists can be part of that solution if they act smartly. And I'm very interested in what else we can learn today from that.